Deep inside the rainforests of Central Africa, in a region so dense that sunlight barely touches the ground at midday, there are communities of people who have shaped their entire existence around rules the outside world has never had to learn. Some of these communities have been visited by outsiders for generations. Others have only recently allowed researchers to walk among them. What all of them share is a way of life so different from anything familiar that when anthropologists first documented it, they struggled to describe it without sounding like they were exaggerating. They were not exaggerating. The forest simply demands a different kind of human being, and the peoples of the Congo Basin became exactly that. For thousands of years, groups known collectively as the Congo Basin's forest peoples, including the Baka, the Mbuti, the F, and several smaller communities scattered across the region, have lived as hunter-gatherers inside one of the largest tropical rainforests on Earth. They build no permanent structures. A shelter made from bent saplings and broad leaves can be built in a single afternoon and abandoned within weeks once the surrounding area has been hunted and gathered enough. Nothing is meant to last because nothing needs to. The forest provides again as soon as a group moves a few kilometers on, and moving is easier than staying. What first strikes most outside visitors is not the survival skill, though that alone is extraordinary. It is the way these communities organize themselves around each other. Among the Baka and related groups, fatherhood looks nothing like it does in most of the world. Researchers who have spent extended time in these communities have documented fathers holding infants for hours at a stretch, calming them, carrying them through the day, and stepping into caregiving roles that in many other cultures are almost entirely left to mothers. This is not an occasional gesture. It is built into the expectations of what it means to be a man in that community, and anthropologists studying paternal involvement across cultures have repeatedly pointed to these groups as some of the most striking examples of shared caregiving found anywhere in the world. Honey gathering is another place where the difference in how these communities relate to danger becomes obvious. Wild honey, hidden inside the upper trunks of towering forest trees and guarded by aggressive bees, is treated as one of the most valuable resources the forest offers. Men climb these trees using nothing more than handmade wooden pegs driven into the bark, sometimes reaching heights of over 60 feet with no harness and no safety net beneath them. They endure repeated stings along the way, because stopping halfway means abandoning both the honey and the climb. What looks like recklessness from the outside is, inside the community, simply competence. A man who can climb for honey is a man who can provide, and the risk is simply the price of that role. Death is handled with a seriousness that reshapes an entire group's movements. In several of these communities, when someone dies inside a shelter, the structure is not reused. It is often destroyed, and the group relocates entirely, refusing to return to that specific site for a long time, sometimes permanently. The belief driving this practice varies between groups, but the underlying logic is consistent. A place where death has occurred is treated as changed, no longer safe in the way it once was. Outsiders have sometimes described this as superstition, but inside the community it functions as something closer to an early form of risk management, wrapped inside a spiritual framework that gives the practice weight and consistency across generations. Initiation into adulthood, for young men in several of these groups, involves ordeals that modern audiences find difficult to fully process. Ceremonies can include prolonged isolation in the forest, physical endurance tests, and exposure to elaborate performances meant to represent forest spirits, all designed to mark a definitive break between childhood and adult responsibility. These rites are not casual. They are treated as one of the most important events in a person's life, carrying weight comparable to what other cultures might assign to a wedding or a graduation, except with far higher physical stakes and far less room for failure. None of this knowledge exists in written form. Every plant that can heal, every plant that can kill, every technique for tracking an animal through unbroken forest, and every detail of ritual practice lives only in the memory of the people who carry it forward. There are no books, no manuscripts, no archives. When an elder dies without having passed everything on, that specific piece of knowledge is gone permanently. This has made these communities a subject of urgent interest for linguists and ethnobotanists alike, who recognize that entire pharmacological and ecological knowledge systems are held together by nothing more than oral transmission from one generation to the next. Farther east, in the more open savanna and woodland regions of the Congo Basin, live communities such as the Azanda, whose systems for understanding cause and effect operate on entirely different assumptions than most of the modern world takes for granted. In the early 20th century, the British anthropologist E. Evans Pritchard spent years living among the Azanda and produced what remains one of the most influential studies in the history of anthropology. His central finding was not that Azanda beliefs about witchcraft were irrational. It was the opposite. Once you accepted the starting premises of their worldview, the entire system operated with remarkable internal consistency. Misfortune, in the Azanda view, is never random. If a granary collapses and injures someone standing beneath it, ordinary physics explains how the structure fell, but only witchcraft explains why that particular person happened to be standing there at that particular moment. Every unfortunate event has both a mechanical cause and a social one, and the social cause is what the community works to identify. To identify it, the Azanda developed a set of oracle practices, the most well-documented of which involves administering a substance to a chicken while asking a yes or no question about a person's guilt or innocence. The chicken's survival or death is read as the answer. Evans Pritchard observed that when results seemed to contradict earlier findings, the system was never treated as broken. Instead, explanations were found within the framework itself, such as the possibility that another party had tampered with the process. In this way, the belief system was, in his words, essentially closed to disproof from within. Being identified as responsible for witchcraft carried enormous social consequences, often resulting in a person's exclusion from community trust for the remainder of their life, and the ability to control access to these oracles was, historically, a significant source of political power for community leaders. Among the Liga people, further into the eastern forests, social status is organized through an initiation-based institution known as Bwami, one of the most elaborate systems of graded social advancement documented anywhere in Africa. Membership is not something a person is simply born into. It is something earned gradually, over years and often decades, through demonstrated wisdom, generosity, and adherence to community values. Bwami is structured in ascending levels, each associated with its own body of proverbs, objects, and responsibilities, and reaching the highest levels is understood as a mark of moral authority as much as social prestige. Objects associated with the highest ranks, including carved figures and masks now held in museum collections around the world, were historically restricted from view by anyone outside the appropriate level of initiation, and the making and unmaking of these restrictions functioned as one of the primary ways Bwami regulated its own internal hierarchy. Colonial administrators in the region repeatedly noted that Bwami's influence over community life often exceeded that of any external authority they attempted to establish, and the institution has continued in modified forms into the present day. Secret initiation societies of this kind are not unique to the Liga. Across parts of Central and West Africa, associations such as Como have historically operated as parallel structures of authority, often organized around ritual objects understood to hold accumulated spiritual power built up over generations of ceremonial use. Access to these objects and the knowledge required to handle them safely has traditionally been restricted to initiated members, and colonial-era reports from French and Belgian administrations repeatedly describe these societies as difficult to penetrate or dismantle, in part because their membership and loyalty networks cross the ethnic and territorial boundaries that colonial administration depended on to maintain control. Outside the Congo Basin itself, other communities around the world offer a similar lesson, that human beings are capable of building entire civilizations around constraints that would seem impossible to anyone raised outside them. In Mongolia, families belonging to the Kazakh minority have practiced golden eagle hunting for centuries, training birds of prey to work alongside human hunters across the frozen steppe. Young eagles are typically taken from wild nests and gradually acclimated to a human handler through weeks of close, careful contact, a process built on patience rather than dominance. Fully trained golden eagles are powerful enough to hunt foxes and even wolves, and the relationship between an eagle and its handler, which can last more than a decade, ends with a ceremonial release, returning the bird to the wild rather than keeping it for life. What was once an almost exclusively male tradition has, in recent decades, seen a rising number of women competing and excelling at events like the Golden Eagle Festival, adding a new chapter to an old practice. In the dense subtropical forests of eastern Paraguay, the Ache people lived as nomadic hunter-gatherers well into the 20th century, giving anthropologists an unusually direct window into forms of social organization believed to resemble those of prehistoric human societies. Ache hunting groups relied on close nonverbal coordination, tracked game with extraordinary precision, and practiced widespread food sharing in which a successful hunt was distributed across the group rather than kept by the individual who made the kill. The transition of Ache communities towards settled life in the second half of the 20th century, often under significant external pressure, has been documented as an extremely difficult period of social and economic disruption, and researchers and Ache community members alike have worked to preserve the knowledge and stories of a way of life that is rapidly disappearing. In the Kalahari Desert of southern Africa, San communities represent one of the oldest continuous cultural lineages on the planet, with genetic and archaeological evidence suggesting a heritage stretching back tens of thousands of years. Traditional San hunting techniques include the use of small arrows tipped with poison derived from beetle larvae, followed by a tracking pursuit that can last days, as hunters follow the animal's trail until the poison takes effect. Their languages, built around distinctive click consonants, are considered among the most phonetically complex in the world. Water storage knowledge, passed down orally across generations, allows some San communities to survive in one of the driest environments on Earth, and their healing dances, in which participants enter deep trance states, remain a subject of ongoing interest to researchers studying the relationship between ritual practice and human physiology. Farther north, above the Arctic Circle, the Sami people have inhabited the far reaches of Scandinavia and northwestern Russia for thousands of years, building a way of life around reindeer herding and a deep, detailed knowledge of one of the harshest environments on the planet. The 20th century brought a painful chapter to Sami history, as Norway, Sweden, and Finland each pursued assimilation policies that separated children from their families, restricted the use of the Sami language, and discouraged traditional dress and customs. Despite this, Sami language, joik singing tradition, and reindeer herding practices have persisted, and Sami communities continue to assert their rights over ancestral lands in the face of modern pressures. From mining and energy development. And in the deep canyons of northern Mexico's Sierra Madre Range, the Raramuri people, whose name translates roughly to those who run fast, have built a culture in which long-distance running is not a sport but a practical necessity, used historically for communication and travel across terrain too steep and remote for other means. Raramuri runners, wearing simple sandals and eating a diet built around corn and beans, gained international attention in the late 20th century after outperforming professional ultramarathon athletes equipped with modern gear, prompting exercise scientists to take a closer look at a way of life built around endurance from early childhood. What unites all these communities, from the dense rainforest of the Congo Basin to the deserts of southern Africa and the frozen steppe of Mongolia, is not that they are relics of an earlier stage of human development. They are living, adapting societies that have organized knowledge, cooperation, risk, and belief in ways shaped precisely by the environments they call home. Much of what researchers have documented about them is not evidence of strangeness, but evidence of how many different, functional answers exist to the same basic human questions: how to survive, how to belong, and how to make sense of a world that does not explain itself. As modern development, resource extraction, and cultural pressure continue to close in on many of these territories, the knowledge these communities hold, most of it never written down, remains as fragile as it is extraordinary, carried forward only as long as there are people left to carry it.